Welcome to Life Tells Stories, the channel dedicated to stories that transport us to worlds full of deep emotions, silent courage, and tangible hope. Here we like to share stories that demonstrate how a small gesture can transform into an opportunity for rebirth for anyone. Have you ever stopped to reflect on how a simple act of kindness can turn the course of an existence around? I invite you to think about it as you listen to today's story. If you love this type of content, remember to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. Your support is essential to continue spreading positive and deeply inspiring messages. Leonardo Ferri was a man who, in the eyes of the world, had everything anyone could want. An extraordinarily successful businessman, a skilled financial strategist, and a celebrated figure in many elite circles, he had built Ferri Enterprises from nothing. Through moments of tremendous challenges and seemingly insurmountable obstacles, his iron will was legendary, and his ability to negotiate multi-million-dollar deals had made him one of the richest men in the country. Yet behind his impeccably tailored suits and refined manner was a side of his life far more important than any number in a bank account. Leonardo was in fact the father of Mattia, a boy of just 10 years old, born with a form of cerebral palsy that prevented him from moving freely and carrying out most of his daily activities independently. From the first days of Mattia's life, doctors had warned Leonardo that his son's path would be complex, dotted with therapies, hours spent learning movements that for other children were very simple, and constant support that would allow him to grow up in the most serene way possible. Despite Leonardo's impressive economic resources, finding someone who would treat Mattia with genuine sweetness, instead of seeing him as a burden or a simple professional responsibility, had become an extremely difficult task. One autumn evening, driven by the desire to listen to his son and indulge at least one of his small requests, Leonardo agreed to stop at a modest family-run diner. It wasn't the type of place the man usually frequented. He was used to luxury restaurants, with award-winning chefs and refined settings. But that evening, in front of Mattia's hopeful eyes, he decided to leave his usual routine aside and try something different. As he crossed the threshold of the diner, he found himself faced with a simple environment, but full of a familiar atmosphere. The warm lights, the wooden tables worn by time, the smell of hot coffee and freshly baked pastries. A sense of tranquility enveloped the space, almost as if it were a safe refuge from the frenzy of the metropolis. Welcoming father and son was Sofia Moretti, a 26-year-old waitress with large hazel eyes and a smile that could put anyone at ease. Although her gaze betrayed a hint of tiredness, there was a special energy in her, as if her tiredness was always overwhelmed by the desire to give a little happiness to others. Sofia had been working there for several months, even working double shifts to make ends meet. She wasn't superficial or ambitious in the usual sense of the word. On the contrary, her only desire was to be able to support herself and her mother, Linda, who was suffering from cancer, with dignity. Since she had received the diagnosis, the life of both had turned into a race against time and against economic precariousness. Expensive treatments, trips to the hospital, medications, sleepless nights wondering how to pay the next installment. All of this had made her a silent fighter, willing to sacrifice her dreams to support her family. As Leonardo sat down with Mattia at their table, an urgent phone call caught him. The latest generation cell phone vibrated continuously, and the man, accustomed to conducting business at all hours, answered in a professional tone, losing himself in questions of budget and contracts. Mattia, sitting next to him, tried to grab the fork to taste the pancakes just served, but his hands began to shake. Every time he tried to bring a bite to his mouth, the piece of pancake fell onto the plate, and the child saw his appetite clash with the frustration of feeling inadequate. Sofia, observing the scene from a few meters away, took courage. She approached discreetly and, in a low and gentle tone of voice, asked Mattia if he needed help. The little boy looked at her, surprised by her thoughtfulness, and nodded shyly. It was then that the young waitress knelt down next to him. taking the fork in her hands to cut the pancakes into smaller pieces so that it was easier for Mathieu to eat them. At the same time, she addressed him with words of encouragement and a few funny jokes to bring a smile to his concentrated expression. For his part, Leonardo, who had just ended the call, found himself witnessing that scene. He was struck by Sophia's attitude. There was no pity in her eyes. There was no rush or constraint in her movement. It was, rather, a spontaneous, human assistance made of closeness and understanding. He saw Masha's face light up as Sophia joked with him, telling him how once as a child, she loved pancakes with chocolate and always got her face dirty. Leonardo couldn't remember the last time he had seen his son laugh with that spontaneity, without feeling observed or judged. It was as if, at least for a moment, Masha's disability was not an obstacle, but just one of life's many challenges. When Sophia returned to tend to other tables, Leonardo leaned toward his son, asking if he liked the girl. Mathieu, still with a smile plastered on his lips, nodded enthusiastically, calling her really kind and special. Leonardo, accustomed to evaluating people based on their talent or their reliability in business, was surprised to find himself reflecting on values such as compassion and the ability to empathize. After all, if he usually chose Masha's nannies and assistants from the most brilliant resumes, perhaps he was underestimating the importance of a less tangible but essential requirement: heart. That evening, Sophia returned home to a modest apartment, furnished with a few essential pieces, where she lived with her mother. Linda was lying on the old couch, her strength reduced to a minimum by grueling cycles of chemo. Sophia smiled, pretending that it had been a day like any other, without mentioning how tired she was or the list of bills waiting for her on the table. Her mother asked her how the diner had gone, and Sophia replied with her usual sweetness that it had been a long shift, but she was happy to have helped a very sweet child. She didn't mention Leonardo Ferri, nor the thoughts that had been crowding her mind for a while, a confusion of worries, desires and hopes mixed with the fear of never being able to overcome the economic problems that loomed. The next morning, as Sophia was getting ready for a new shift, the manager of the diner called her aside with an excited expression. He told her that someone was waiting for her at the entrance. With no small amount of agitation, the girl went out to discover that Leonardo Ferri was there waiting for her, looking impeccable as he had the night before. The man greeted her with a half-smile, explaining that he wanted to thank her personally for the kindness she had shown Mathieu, and before she could reply, he invited her to have dinner with him and his son that same evening. Sophia, taken aback, replied that she would have a second shift, and that it would be impossible. It was then that Leonardo, with the typical confidence of someone who doesn't take no for a definitive answer, looked at her and offered to compensate her with a sum equal to 3 times her evening salary. Sophia's mind immediately went to her mother, to the medical care, to all those bills that had been piling up for weeks. For her, that amount would have made the difference between paying a portion of hospital bills or continuing to postpone, risking Linda's clinical situation getting worse. Although she felt dazed, she finally accepted the invitation, with a slight sense of guilt for having put economic necessity first, but also with the awareness that that unexpected proposal could be a sign of destiny. That evening, Sophia showed up at the Ferris Majestic Villa wearing a simple dress, purchased in a thrift store. The immense automatic gates opened before her, revealing a path lit by torches and a garden cared for down to the smallest detail, with flower beds of rare flowers. The large front door was opened by the butler, who greeted her with deference. Sophia felt her heart pounding, fearing that she would appear out of place in such a refined environment. But as soon as Mathieu saw her, he slipped out of the dining room and ran toward her, laughing and calling her name. That small sign of warmth swept away the embarrassment and made her feel, if not exactly at home, at least welcome. Sitting at the table, in a room adorned with crystal chandeliers, gilded frames and paintings by famous artists, Sophia, Leonardo and Mathieu spent an evening more intimate than the young waitress could have ever imagined. If the first impact had been intimidating, Mattia and his naive jokes soon made everything more spontaneous. Leonardo, initially focused on observing Sofia's behavior, began to ease the tension. He realized that the girl was not pretending to be kind to his son. Theirs was a natural relationship, made of smiles, brief glances of understanding, and a complicity that he had rarely seen in other people who had succeeded one another as assistants in Masha's life. At the end of the evening, when the important guests had left, Sofia was still there, along with Leonardo and Masha. It was then that the man found the courage to propose something truly important: a job as Masha's personal assistant. He explained to her that she could live in the villa's annex, receive a great salary, and above all, be sure that all of her mother's medical expenses would be covered. Leonardo's words struck her in the heart, almost bringing tears to her eyes. She caressed Masha's face with her gaze, and he met her eyes with a hopeful expression. Sofia, her voice trembling, asked Leonardo why he wanted to help her so much. He answered with extreme frankness, admitting that for a long time he had been looking for someone who would look at his son as a normal child, not as a problem to be managed. The man was convinced that Sofia had the gift of bringing light into people's lives, and he wanted Mattia to be able to enjoy that light every day. Shaken by the intensity of the moment, even the most reserved glances of the servants betrayed a deep emotion. If you were in Sofia's place, would you have said yes without hesitation, putting aside all reserve for the sake of your well-being and that of your family? Or would you have feared that behind such a generous offer there was some ulterior motive? Let me know in the comments. I'm really curious to know your opinion, because Sofia's reaction is not a given. In the end, however, the young maid accepted the job. Moving into the fairy villa meant leaving her small apartment and arranging for her mother to be cared for at home. But the prospect of superior quality care for Linda and a house without architectural barriers, where Mattia could finally move around more easily, filled her heart with hope. The first month of living together was a whirlwind of emotions. Mattia, more enthusiastic than ever, showed Sofia every corner of his world, from the large rooms full of never-used toys to the rooms where he did physiotherapy with high-level specialists. Sofia noticed that, despite the luxury, Leonardo and Masha's life was rather lonely. The man seemed to have no close friends, and Mattia took private lessons at home, rarely seeing his peers. Little by little, Sofia's presence began to fill the voids that had formed in both their hearts. With simple gestures, such as preparing homemade snacks or telling Mattia funny anecdotes from her childhood, she brought a breath of normality to a place that, despite being luxurious, had always had an aseptic feel, as if joy were a secondary good. Meanwhile, Sofia's mother was receiving specialized care, no longer having to worry about not being able to pay for an MRI or a last-minute prescription for a drug. This new peace of mind allowed Sofia to focus deeply on Mattia, to give him real attention, as if he were her younger brother. Leonardo, witnessing these changes, began to feel a sincere gratitude towards the girl. But there was more. Every day, he discovered in Sofia a character trait that fascinated him, that showed him a world in which altruism, humility, and hope were not empty words. After a few months, on one of the rare free afternoons, Sofia suggested to Leonardo and Mattia that they take a walk in a public park, to enjoy nature and allow Mattia to breathe fresh air, away from the usual domestic walls. Although initially hesitant, Leonardo agreed. It was an unforgettable afternoon. The sunset light passed through the trees, creating a golden atmosphere. Mattia laughed while Sofia helped him collect colored leaves, and Leonardo, walking a few steps away from them, felt for the first time in his life free from work constraints, completely present in the moment. He realized that he had never given his son a simple afternoon of carefreeness like that. The bond between Sofia and Mattia grew stronger day by day, made up of small daily conquests, a new word learned, a new physiotherapy exercise performed with less difficulty, and evenings spent watching a movie with a blanket on the knees and laughter that followed one another instead of the usual formal silences. Leonardo, for his part, suddenly found himself smiling more often, opening up to deep conversations with Sofia, wondering if his existence, before her arrival, had not been empty of essential human values. It was in one of those moments that the man realized he felt for the girl an affection that went beyond professional respect. He began to think of her more frequently, to seek her eyes during dinners, to agree with her on small and large issues in life. The fear of being inappropriate held him back, because he did not want to disturb the serenity he had just achieved, and did not want to seem like an employer ready to take advantage of the situation. But as time passed, the mutual glances, the shy smiles, and the moments of closeness became more and more intense. Meanwhile, even the servants of the villa noticed the different energy that enveloped the fairy family. There was a new harmony, a kind of domestic warmth that had been missing before. The laughter that came from Masha's room, when Sofia told him a story or helped him tidy up his toys, had the power to dissolve the tension that once enveloped the walls of that overly large residence. One evening, while they were in the garden watching Mattia, who, with a little help, was managing to take a few steps on his own, Leonardo turned to Sofia. The moonlight reflected on her hazel eyes, and in that moment the man felt that no material possession could ever give him the same joy as that single look. Without saying anything, he gently took her hand, in a gesture that contained the gratitude, the esteem, and the nascent feeling he felt for her. Sofia did not pull away. In those seconds it seemed that everything was in the right place, as if life had brought them there, together, for a reason greater than them. Years later, the story of this extraordinary family had a happy ending that, at the beginning, no one would have imagined. Leonardo and Sofia announced their marriage, and Mattia, more mature and much more independent thanks to therapies, gave a speech during the ceremony that moved every single person present. He said he felt lucky not because his father was a billionaire, but because he had managed to find the right person, the only one capable of transforming a huge house into a real home full of warmth. The story of Leonardo, Sofia, and Mattia reminds us that we often look for complex solutions or spend astronomical sums to solve problems that could be addressed more simply with more heart. Sometimes, all it takes is meeting the right person at the right time and having the courage to trust. An act of kindness and genuine dedication can transcend social, economic, and cultural barriers, creating bonds that enrich the lives of all involved. For my part, I find this story to be a powerful example of how love and empathy can go beyond any obstacle. I like to think that every encounter can be an opportunity to sow a small seed of hope in someone else's life. We often underestimate the weight of a smile, a word of comfort, a selfless gesture. And instead, as we have seen, it is precisely these nuances that give true depth to existence, that make us feel alive and connected to the world. If this story touched you, I invite you once again to support the channel Life Tells Stories. Subscribe, leave a like, and, if you wish, activate the bell to always be updated. The more of us, the more we can share messages of inspiration that reach those who need them most. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for dedicating your time to this story, and I hope that you can take away a precious lesson. Never underestimate the power of a gesture of kindness. I wish you a wonderful day, and I look forward to seeing you at the next story, where we will explore another extraordinary proof that life often surprises us with its unpredictable and wonderful intersections.